Welcome to A Peaceful Path, special education legal advocacy for families with children that have special needs.
Hey there, and welcome back to A Peaceful Path, special education legal advocacy for families with children that have special needs with Michelle Becker. Michelle is a special education attorney who helps parents navigate the school system with clarity and confidence. My name is Kevin Rosenquist. Today we're talking about what happens as students with disabilities grow older and begin preparing for life after high school. Transition planning can feel overwhelming, but Michelle's here to explain what it really involves and how parents can make sure their child's plan sets them up for success. Michelle, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So now we've talked a lot about kids. Now we're going to talk about sort of that transition process. What should parents expect? When should the parents expect that transition to start? And what is it designed to accomplish for their child?
So for sure, transition planning should start like the sophomore year. I think they have 15 and a half or 16 is when they are required, high schools are required to start transition planning for students. Whether they're going into the next phase of adult transition program or whether or not they're graduating from high school. When you think about transition planning, there's adult transitioning into the 18 to 22 extended educational period, because special education goes from 3 years old to 22. For kids that don't graduate with diplomas after 12th grade, there's the extended 18 to 22 where they can go to basically the adult transition school. And every school district has one and prepares those kids for life after 22. What I can say in reality is you should start thinking about transition planning in elementary school. It's not documented, but I think that there's some key things that parents need to consider when it comes to transition planning. First, I would say, I've had school districts make a determination as early as first grade that a kid should be on an alternative path. If you ask me, that's way too early, because if they're going to be on an alternative path, that's basically a functional skills program. And that's pretty much a kid that's not going to graduate and is going to go to school until they're 22 and achieve a certificate of completion at the end of 22. You don't want that type of decision to be made as early as first grade because you don't know what's going to happen. So to start a kid down a functional skills program as early as first grade is not a good idea. And I would always recommend fighting for access to a general education curriculum, even if it's modified, to help a kid continue to progress in what could be a high school diploma pathway if it looks like they might be able to do that. My own preferred mode is to wait until at least the, fourth grade or fifth grade when they're transitioning into middle school to make such an important transition decision.
That's a big transition in school life too. You go from that staying in a one class to bouncing between classes, and it is a very big point in a kid's life. So that makes sense. It's a good time for that.
Yeah. And it is a big decision to say, my kid is going to be on a modified functional skills curriculum starting in sixth grade or seventh grade, depending upon where your middle school starts, because there's different things you need to start planning for if your kid is on that path versus whether your kid is on a high school diploma path, right? Because I'll just use the functional skills path. What I have seen, my experience is the kids that are on the functional skills path, learning is slow. And if you want your kid to be independent, you need to start doing things to help that kid be independent as early as possible. right? Because what we're not talking about learning how to read and write, but see safety signs, right? Make sure that if it's a kid with, fine motor, challenges, cutting their meat, cutting their food, being able to recognize their name. I mean, this is the more extreme, but as a parent, you need to make sure that you're teaching your kids safety words, community signs, counting money, all because if learning is slow, 22 comes fast. And you need to be planning this all the way out through that time period. And I know it's hard to kind of imagine that, but for parents who are listening to this podcast, they know what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah.
They see how difficult they weren't able to learn their letters. They weren't able to write their letters. They didn't learn their numbers. And now they're going into 7th grade. Those kids are not graduating from high school unless something drastic changes. So if it took them this long, how long is it going to take them to be able to, point to the word help and understand what help means in the right context? So I would say for those more moderate to severely disabled kids, you start your transition planning very early and really understand how to help your kid be as independent as possible by 22, because it comes fast. Now, in terms of, I would say the majority of general ed kids with IEPs because they have ADHD, to kids with disabilities who are high functioning and are going to be able to graduate from high school with a diploma. Technically, it doesn't start until high school. However, in order to graduate from high school, at least in California, you have to finish 1 year of algebra. So which math skills do you need to make sure they master to successfully achieve that?
Yeah.
If it's an executive functioning skill like planning and organization, which ADHD kids with autism, the executive functioning skills, what we as parents do a lot of time, we are the kids' frontal lobe for the majority of their academic career.
Sure.
However, if I've seen it once, I've seen it a million times. There's like this aha sophomore, junior year where like my kid's going to graduate. And when I ask him if he completed an assignment, he's like, I don't know. Because we've been pushing him around in a wheelbarrow for the last 10 years,
Right.
making sure that everything is getting done, building IEPs that have every possible accommodation to meet their needs. Have we missed an opportunity to write goals that make sure they are becoming more self-sufficient over time? So there is transition planning, which I'll get to. It's very cut and dry, but there is transition planning, because I'm sure even you with your preschool kid, is my kid going to go to public school or private school? You're already starting transition planning.
Mm-hmm.
If my kid's going to go to public school, am I living in the right neighborhood to go to the elementary school I want? That's transition planning. What does my kid need to do to get into that middle school? Right? So all of these same things parents with special needs kids need to be thinking about.
Right.
It's not something that's it's not something that ever leaves you. You have to be thinking, where's my kid going to be? Another key piece of this is parents who they want their kid to get a one-on-one aid. They don't have the executive functioning skills. They don't have the emotional regulation skills. They don't have the behavioral skills to kind of go it alone in a classroom. They're smart enough. They're capable of doing grade level work as long as you have the additional hands support to help this kid manage sitting in a class of 30 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So parents fight for the one-to-one aid. They get the one-to-one aid because the kid needs the aid. The school districts are quick to say we don't want the kid to become independent on the aid or dependent on the aid. We need the kid to be independent. That is very true. as much as it's off-putting to parents and as much as it's off-putting to lawyers to hear that, because when they say that to me, I say, right on, I agree. You want the kid to be independent. So we wouldn't have an aid plan without a fade plan in mind, right? I mean, that's my argument is, of course, we don't want the aid here forever, but we need to we need to plan on fading the aid out.
Yeah.
And this is another area where invariably what happens is parents recognize by the time their kids are like freshmen or sophomores, my kid can't do this stuff. I do need him to be more independent. We need to start fading the aid. You do. Like fading the aid has to be part of a transition plan because an aid isn't going to follow your kid around in life.
Right.
So aids are a big issue. IEPs that pretty much cover every possible need, I'm all for it. We need a kid to learn to read, write, do math, be exposed to science, social studies, work on projects, do spelling tests, do everything. So having a really strong IEP up front is very important. But as they get into like 8th grade, 9th grade, you're starting to think about what comes after high school.
Yep.
Okay. And that's where the actual high school plan comes in, the actual transition plan, which is built into IEPs. And basically, the transition plan is broken down into 3 key areas. Well, I should say there's 3 key areas, which is, degree check, the diploma check, and then there is the procedural aspect of making sure the kid knows his rights by age 17 plus, and then because he's going to be responsible at 18, and then the goals associated with his transition. So basically, when you go through a transition plan, there is the degree check. Is he on track to graduate? And they list out the classes: freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, number of units in progress, number of units completed, number of units left to go. That's a big piece of making sure that if your kid is planning on graduating, it's all there in black and white, and you can refer to that any day of the week. The second part is just procedural, check the boxes. And then the third part is where the goals come in. And what they want the kid to kind of do is figure out what, after I graduate, my academic goal is to go to a 4-year, to go to a 2-year, to go to a trade school, to sit in the basement, whatever that academic goal is. And then there is tasks associated with it. So let's say you want to go to a 4-year university. Okay, well, your goal for this year is to identify 5 universities that you might want to go to and find out what the admission requirements are. And then you take that knowledge and build that into your plan for how you're going to do it in your coursework in high school. The second part is the career goals. When I graduate from high school, I want to go and work at, Geek Squad. Okay. So the goals might be I want to, go to Best Buy, find out when I, pick up an application, when can I first apply, what skills do I need to have, find out all of that, like employment information. So that's another goal. And then the third goal might be independent living skills. I want to learn how to drive. What am I going to do to learn how to drive? I'm going to go to the DMV and do da 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 da. And that is the essence of the transition plan. And kids usually get 3 years of transition planning support. Some school districts start in middle school, most start in high school, most start their freshman year. And basically, it just kind of builds on itself until it's time to graduate.
Mm-hmm. Are there community or state programs or resources that parents can tap into outside the school system to continue supporting their young adult?
So, yeah, Department of Rehabilitation and Workability are two of those resources. And basically, they can actually access those two resources while their kids are in high school. And certainly for their kids, the kids who are 18 to 22 that are getting a certificate of completion. Let's just say they want to uh, hang up clothes at the dry cleaner, right? They can get a job, and then Workability pays, or Department of Rehabilitation. Those are two California state agencies that they can tap into. Regional Center is probably another one that helps direct them into resources. But basically, let's say you want to stock shelves at CVS. Workability works with CVS. There's certain companies out there that work with these agencies that employ these students with disabilities.
Okay, that's helpful. That's great for parents to have those kind of resources. What is when in these situations, when does someone come to you? Like when for the transition part, is it when they need help with getting the school on the same page? Is that really when you kind of get involved?
So I can honestly tell you, parents aren't coming to me for this. It's honestly, they don't know about it. And it's almost like a second or third thought within the IEP process,
Okay.
right? Basically, I usually have parents on board well in advance of this part of their IEP process. But even if they were to call me and say, I need help with the transition, which of course I would help them with, it would be because they didn't get one and they really want one. And they're like,
Mhm.
this was left out of my kid's IEP. And I know that he's supposed to have one, and right now he doesn't have one. So I need you to help me push for that. I can honestly say I do not believe that this is a higher priority. Like, it's not a super high priority for school districts. There's very few wonderful transition plans. I think that there's a huge area of opportunity, and there are some lawyers and school districts that might be really good at this. So I'm not saying across the board, but basically, if your kid is a kid that's going to transition into the 18 to 22 um, post high school, adult school, you're worried about lots of stuff.
Mhm.
Employment is literally, you know, if they still haven't learned safety signs.
Then employment is not your biggest concern.
Exactly. And
Yep.
that's not diminishing the need to have it. We
Right.
need to have it. We need to be forward thinking. I think all parents are forward thinking for their kids. So it's right that it's there. I think lawyers, advocates, parents could probably all push school districts to do a lot more on this. But when you're like, my kid can't keep his homework organized well enough to turn it in, so he's failing all of his classes, but it's all stuffed at the bottom of his backpack. Oh, and by the way, what about that workability program?
Mhm.
Right? You're going to
Yeah.
be like, I need my kid to be organized.
Yeah. Start.
Workability won't matter.
No, they're not going to matter if they can't. Yeah, the function. And you brought up the safety signs too. I mean, that's obviously very, very important in life. So
Exactly.
yeah, that makes sense.
So it's important. And I love that it's part of this podcast because it should be a priority. And I think that the feedback that I gave at the earlier part of this section is way more important and
Mhm.
deserves a lot of time and consideration with parents and IEP teams to make sure that good decisions are made, to make sure that the kids are as independent and most prepared as possible after they leave either high school or their high school certificate of completion program.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, interesting stuff for sure. A lot of times you don't think about what happens after high school, but awesome stuff. Thanks for sharing that, and thank you for joining us on a peaceful path. If your child is approaching high school graduation and you want to be sure the transition plan truly prepares them for adulthood. Michelle Becker can help. Visit michellebeckerlaw.com to learn more. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Leave us a review. Michelle, always love chatting with you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.